Okay.
All right.
Happy to be joined today by a tag team that's recently formed, and they'll be in action at MLW Thursday, August 29th at Summer of the Beasts at Melrose Ballroom in Long Island City, Queens. It's C.W. Anderson and Brock Anderson. Andersons, welcome to Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. How are you doing today?
We're good. We're good. Thank you for having us.
Okay, so I'm going to start with C.W. because I've watched you all the way back to ECW, and I know you were in the original version of MLW. Why this tag team, and why are you back in MLW?
The tag team itself just makes sense. We're being in Anderson. It was pitched about a year or so ago about Brock and I tagging. Some guys that run promotions down here in North Carolina. They run the WrestleCade that's really famous down here on Thanksgiving weekend. Brian Hawks and Tracy Myers. We had pitched the idea. Brian and Tracy made it happen, threw Brock and I together. And it's one of those things that makes almost too much sense. Brock just starting and me still, 31 years in the business, still going. It's one of those that just clicked from the beginning. Brock and I have been tagging together almost a year now. We've done some 6-mans on and off, but as far as tagging together, it's been about a year now. And very happy with this run with Brock, enjoying tagging with him and coming back to MLW. They're back up hot and heavy. And again, like you said, I was one of the originals. I loved being part of MLW. It's one of my favorite times along with Japan and ECW, and being back, I came back a few months ago. Reception was great. Wrestling and working for Court Bauer has always been, something I've enjoyed. But MLW and the Andersons, it makes really good sense. And we're happy that Court and MLW have given us this opportunity to come back and be a part of this great organization.
That's great. And over to Brock now. How have you found your journey outside of AEW, outside of the Nightmare Factory, and what do you see in this tag team with your distant Anderson cousin CW?
Well, when I was at, like you mentioned, when I was at AEW, it was hindsight's 2020. You can look back and see that things weren't going to be the way they were, but I didn't know. It was a new company. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I don't think, looking back now, I was ready for that, because for young guys, there is no setup to really learn and grasp the business. It's just basically just TV. So when I left there, this process, when C-Dub pitched, I think he sent it through my coach Lodi from the Flock from WCW. He said, "Hey, would you have any interest in tagging with C-Dub?" And I didn't even take a minute. I said, "Absolutely, that makes too much sense." So for a guy, even though I've been in for 4 years, that's not 4 years like back in the day where they're wrestling every day. It's been harder to get reps, but every time I'm in there with C-Dub, I learn something new. And he tells me the things that my old man can't tell me, because you can either be a father or you can be a coach. So C-Dub's that good crutch to lean on when he's like, "Hey, he ain't going to tell you this, but this is where you messed up, or this looked good. This is what you need to do, and this is what we have in mind when we're doing this."
And for CW, who was the first Anderson you remember watching as a fan, and what kind of epitomizes the Anderson style of wrestling for you?
Growing up, in my story, most people know that I didn't like professional wrestling growing up. It took my brother getting me to watching the Rock and Roll Express to get into wrestling. And then Arn and Ole were really the first ones, more along Arn being the first Anderson, and then learning the history with Ole and Gene and Lars. And then when I got from playing baseball and got in.
I think we just lost CW. So I'm going to move over to Brock if we get CW back on. Yep, we got him back. I'm sorry, we lost you there for a moment. You were talking about seeing, learning about Gene and Ole and Lars.
Yeah. Learning with Gene and Ole, and then from Ole and Arn, and learning how the professional wrestling is supposed to be, of the Anderson style of picking one body part, keeping them in our corner, keeping them out of our goal line, so to speak. And that's what I've adapted to. I've never been the high flyers and things like that. I'm more infantry than I am airborne, and love that old school style of professional wrestling, because I grew up outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and seeing the NWA and Mid-Atlantic on a weekly basis. That's the style of wrestling that I love, and I'm trying to keep implementing. And now passing this knowledge along to Brock, I've been called Ole now to Brock's Arn, and I'm okay with that because he's coming along so nicely and everything's clicking with us. But that old school of wrestling, that's Brock and I. We're old school wrestling with a little bit of millennial touch.
That's very good. I mean, and if you're going to be Ole, and obviously we just lost Ole Anderson very recently, though, I think you'd have to be a little. You have to walk into the show a little angrier than you are right now if you're going to be the Ole Anderson.
Yeah,
side.
Once I get in the ring, I am that Ole because then I'm an old curmudgeon veteran when it gets around like that.
And for Brock, you're a little young to even see much of your father, Arn Anderson's heyday in real time. And Gene Anderson, I think, died before you were born. Yeah. How much have you heard and seen of Gene and Ole and Lars and Arn? And is it fun for you to kind of just know that your dad is so revered and well-respected in this industry?
So I didn't get to see much of Gene and Ole, or I really didn't see any of Gene and Lars. But of course, pre-network, pre-DVDs, we had all the VHS tapes at the house. And I would see him and Ole when he first started, when he got to Charlotte. And I've seen the one with him and the Rock and Roll that he says is probably his favorite match. Just everything with the Horsemen, all that style, picking a body part and rendering it useless. So I understood because, like you said, I didn't get to see my dad. My dad was not an active wrestler when I was growing up. It wasn't like he was on TV every week. He was just a guy who used to wrestle. So it was kind of cool to go back and watch these tapes and see, damn, my dad used to be a badass, even though I knew he was still a badass because when I acted up, he would come home and show me that he had a little double A in. But as far as that Anderson tag team, yeah, it was, I think, what C-Dub is doing for me now, it's parallel. I think Ole helped my dad so much in the beginning of filling in the blanks and making it simpler, like what this business truly is. And I think he learned that a lot from Ole. And I can already tell you, I've already learned a great deal from being with C-Dub.
And I think a lot of people sort of learned a little bit more about Ole this year when they dove into his career a little bit with him passing away this year too, just because, my goodness, what a promo, what a tough guy, and just what a credible wrestler he was. And just, it's so funny to think about how young Arn Anderson was when that tag team was going on, because Arn just stepped into that so seamlessly with Ole and just, really gave a new twist, kind of the way you guys are doing now, on what the Andersons as a tag team should be, because the Andersons are tag team wrestling. You look at that history and it's just amazing. So it sounds like you certainly did a lot of studying of the old tapes, because you have it right at your fingertips. And you are old enough, though, I think, to have seen that the crazy Arn Anderson spine buster at WrestleMania. I think it was 17 in Houston when he turned it on the Undertaker.
That's my first memory as a young child of being in anything wrestling, which was terrifying because we were high up in the Sky Dome. It was at the Sky Dome, right? That one?
I think that one was the actually, I'm trying to think back.
18, where he spine busted Taker.
Undertaker, right? Yep.
Sky Dome. We're high up in the press boxes they have there, and they have the big screen right there over the stadium, so we can't really see what's going down. But I think my mom kind of like gave me the Iggy, like, your dad's coming. I'm like, what are you talking about? How can you see? And on the big screen, I see him slide in. He hits the spine buster on Taker, and I'm like, oh damn. But as soon as he rolls out to the ring, he takes one jab and he comes up bleeding like a stuck pig. I was years old. I'm horrified. I'm bawling my eyes out. And my mom's just sitting there all normal. I'm like, why are you so calm right now? Like, I'm losing it. And he's down there bleeding.
What an unbelievable performer your dad was and is, and just one of my all-time personal favorites. For CW, you stepped away from the ring for a little bit in 2020 and 21. I believe you even said you weren't going to do podcast interviews, so I'm grateful that that's been lifted. Yeah. But what was it that pulled you back in for the wrestling that you've continued doing now?
When I walked away, a few years ago, I had lost who, Chris was. I knew CW 24/7, and that was the person that I become, 24/7, and I didn't like. Once I got away from wrestling, I realized how much professional wrestling was me. This is my 31st year, and it's almost like I didn't know anything else. And coming back, it was taking me stepping away from wrestling to realize how much I missed it. Because at one point for those couple years before I stepped away, I was every weekend somewhere, and it was causing a strain to the person I was married to at the time, which ended up with the divorce. And um, again, it just, once I got back into wrestling, I fell back in love with professional wrestling again. And, being at shows and seeing the people that I called my second family. And then that's along the opportunities that I started getting, tagging with Brock a couple of times in six mans and being around Arn. And then I remember one day we're going over a six man, and Brock and I and the guy we were tagging with, Preston Quinn, had this one spot that we were trying to work out. And I asked Arn what he thought of it, and he made the simplest change that made it 100 times better. And I remember looking at Brock and PQ, and I'm going, I don't know a daggone thing about wrestling. And listening to Arn put it in simple terms for us made me, and it was a reigniting for me to learn this business, and even more at even the years, because every day still now I got the best of Arn and Ole, and I got the best of the Horsemen, the best of Midnight Express that I'm watching on a daily basis and jotting down notes. And Brock can tell you, I'll message him every so many days and say, hey, I got this idea, let's work on this. And that's what I love about it, that I want to leave this business better than I made it, and I'm in it right now. And passing this knowledge along to Brock is something that I'm really enjoy doing.
And that's really the best, one of the best parts about wrestling. You could be in 30 something years like you, and you're still learning new things and, things that you could pick up. For Brock, had you followed CW's career before you guys linked up, like you said before?
Yes. Like when I was growing up, so I didn't get to see, it was a little too early. I probably could have saw it, but there's no chance ECW, the real ECW, would have been on in our household.
Yeah,
as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, but
I wouldn't recommend it.
But I do remember him coming back for the ECW reboot, which
right.
I was like, that was prime. I was like 9, 10, and every time they would come through Charlotte, they did. CW, you can correct me. I don't know if it changed, but I believe it would be after SmackDown tapings.
Yes.
Does that sound correct?
Yep.
So I remember when SmackDown would like come to Charlotte and my dad would get us tickets. Yes, I remember those ECW. I was like, wait a minute, Anderson. And I mean, I'm 10. It wasn't clicking or anything, but I'm like, Anderson, he kind of looks like us. What's that about? And I just remember seeing that style and everything. But he had a super kick too, so that also threw me for a loop. So I'm like, I don't know what this guy's deal is.
And for CW, what was it like? What was it like being an active Anderson in a place like ECW? And what's it like for you being sort of the last of that breed?
In the beginning, once I started running as Anderson, and then when I became a singles and I got to the power plant, I went through that tryout, and I started really learning because I was never formally trained until I got to the power plant. And I'm already 6 years into the business. So Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker and Pez Watley and Mike Winter are taking everything that I knew and fine tuning it. And I was also petrified of meeting Arn, because Arn and I have never met, and I knew I got the permission, but I've never gotten permission from him or Ole. So I was petrified of, seeing Arn at WCW. And then when it came through with ECW and got close to Paul loved the idea of me being the Anderson and related to the Andersons doing, because he says, you have the left punch like Arn, you have the spine buster. And he said he had talked to Arn, about giving me the Enforcer moniker back when we redoing the Dangerous Alliance. So my whole thing with being an Anderson is just honoring the name, not going in and doing all the crazy stuff, putting a little flair to it of myself, like the super kick that I loved Chris Adams doing. But I want to honor the Anderson name and honor Ole and Gene and Lars and Arn himself to carry that name for as long as I did. And that was the biggest thing at ECW, was to say, hey, yes, I'm an Anderson, whether you believe so that I'm related or not, but I'm honoring this name because of the legacy that name has.
And then for Brock, was there any hesitation for you to be an Anderson in wrestling, considering what the expectations are for second generation wrestlers? Or did you just look in the mirror and say, what else am I going to be looking like this?
I think you hit it right on the head, Phil. If I would have tried to come out, be like Buster McGillicuddy or something, they'd be like, my ass. That's Arn's kid. There's no hiding it. To execute a paternity test on me would be a waste of a perfectly fine paternity test. I'm definitely the old man's kid. Yeah, it never even crossed my mind to be anything else than an Anderson
Yeah.
because of that lineage, that legacy that name upholds.
The field first time I met Brock was down at Lodi school, and everybody knows I trained Lodi, and Lodi helped train Brock. And after working out with Brock that very first time I got Lodi off to himself, I said, "There is no doubt in my mind that that's Arn Anderson's kid, not one bit. The way his mannerisms, his movements, everything about him speaks Arn Anderson."
And poor Joe Hennig, because I actually had McGillicuddy written down in my notes too.
I didn't need to take a shot at Joe. I didn't even think of that. Yep.
Yeah, but I totally wrote the same thing in my notes. I was like, "What are you going to call yourself? Something McGillicuddy?" And I was like, "Dude, you went right there with me." So very good. And for CW, is there a subtlety in the Anderson wrestling playbook that maybe fans don't think about? Everybody knows about the body part. Everybody knows about cutting off the ring, the rugged physical style, the left hand. Is there a little nuance that you've noticed, maybe studying it, that you might be able to share that people might not be thinking about when they're watching an Anderson tag match?
One of the small things that I love doing, and I even have it on one of my T-shirts, and that Anderson's hold true to this, is the emotion over motion. We get you more emotionally involved than our motion. We're not running the ring 100 miles an hour, but we will tear that ring apart, keep you in our corner, and beat you to death, and make the fans believe, in that baby face, to build that baby face up. Because as Andersons, that's what we do. We destroy a baby face and his body part, and to get the fans into it, because without those fans, there is no us to an extent. So that's the little nuance, is the emotional part we help bring into the ring over the motion part.
And what would that look like if you guys were working the other side? Would there be a difference if it was an Anderson babyface team?
I asked Arn about the second time that I got to talk to him at Lodi's school, what was the difference from you working babyface to heel? Did you change anything? And he said, not one thing. He said, my emotion was there, my intensity was there. He said, but then I would wait for the heel to do something to me so I could give it back to him tenfold. We're still that dirty players, but we don't go breaking the rules as heels. We just wait for the heel to do it to us, so it justifies us giving it back to them. We're still that heel, but the fans love us.
Fascinating. I love that I can talk about stuff I've literally been watching for about 40 years and learn new things about it. Because one thing I always, when I started watching wrestling, I think the first turn I remember watching, Brock, was the Ole turning when the Horseman kicked him out, and I think Tully called him an outsider and all that stuff. And then Ole had the run, and then I think he wrestled Big Bubba a little bit after that too. But that's literally the first turn. That and Paul Orndorff turning on Hulk Hogan are the first two things I remember when somebody moved to the other side when I was a kid. And with Arn, it was always his ability to be like a large guy, and you guys are both pretty big guys, and still get bounced around the ring like he was light as a feather. So is that something that you kind of want to pride yourself into as you kind of look through, the past and the way that you want to approach it?
Well, to be honest with you, my dad, but for civilian standards, is a pretty large dude. But if you look at the roster in both companies back in the day, he was maybe middle of the road, lower middle of the road. There were some big hombres.
Yeah.
So I think he was smart enough to know, what would that do if I'm bouncing these big swolled up guys around.
Right.
He's like, if I make them look good, it'll be logical. And then if I do something at the end just to screw them, then it'll be like, oh, that son of a bitch. Next time my boy will get him. But yeah, so he taught me that if you go in there and you eat somebody up, who did you beat? Even if you know maybe what's going to go down, you make that guy look as good as possible, because when you get your hand raised, it'll be like, damn, that guy almost had him, and next time he'll get him. He had him on the ropes. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's also a business, and you're trying to continue the business too. You don't want to cut anything off, and any opportunities. You mentioned before, coaching and having your dad. What's Arn Anderson like as a coach? And who are any other mentors you've had early in your career, or anybody else that you even pattern yourself after?
Pattern myself. I don't think I'd intentionally do it, but I think C-Dub alluded to it. I guess my mannerisms and I've heard even just things as simple as running the ropes and things like that. I think it's just genetics. I think I look like him, but guys I grew up watching, I really liked Randy. Randy was one of my favorites, Randy Orton. And I think his style, and I think him just being his relationship with my dad, maybe that's why when my dad was working for WWE, I think he had a big part in maybe molding that style. But Randy was one of my favorites. HBK was my favorite. You won't see a whole lot of things I'm doing that Shawn Michaels is doing because I don't know who else can. And as far as mentors, it would be a laundry list at this point. Wow. Obviously, I mean, there's not really, I mean, if you had to peg it down to one guy, obviously Lodi, because Lodi he brought us in when I was a nobody. He said, yes, come train 15 minutes down the road. He trained me. He taught me the basics. He opened it up. He answered all my questions. During COVID, when all the gyms were shut down, he was kind enough to let me and my dad work out at his personal training facility where the ring is. So he helped me in that way stay in shape. And then when I got to AEW, there was a multitude that's out there that a lot of people in the back didn't ask some of the veterans for guidance. I was not one of those guys. Every one of those guys that had been around, made money, and been a long-term stay in this business. I mean, you can name them. You can Dustin Rhodes, Dean Malenko, Mark Henry's in the back, Big Show's in the back, my dad's in the back, Tully's in the back. Who else we got? I mean, Jerry Lynn. I'm leaving some Jericho's back there. Punk pulled me aside one time, believe it or not, and critiqued my match, which I thought was wild. FTR, both those guys. Those guys are my favorite tag team going today. I respect the hell out of those guys. Cody, if it wasn't for Cody, I don't know where I'd be at right now. Selfless with his time, selfless with his guidance. Any of those guys, QT in the back, all those guys. There's so many guys. There's not one guy from there, but there was a lot, and I picked everybody's brain. And right now, CW is that learning tree that has been the rock since I left there. That is that guiding force that I say, hey, what do you think of this? Or what do you think of that? And like I alluded to earlier, he tells me things that the old man can't, which is very refreshing because I need that. Because my dad ain't going to tell me everything because sometimes, like I said, you can either be a father or you can be a coach.
That's great. And CW, who are and were your mentors? Is there anybody else that we didn't bring up?
No, my two, it's always been Arn, but the other one's Bobby Eaton. I idolized Bobby to where the very first encounter I had with him was at ECW when Paul brought him in to work a little small program with me. And I walked in through the Gorilla, coming back from the ECW arena, and I see Paul and Bobby sitting there talking, and I had to go off in a room and collect myself because I was hyperventilating like a 12-year-old girl meeting Justin Bieber for the first time. Bobby meant that much to me and still does. When he passed away, it hurt, and it was only a few years before Bobby passed away that he found out how much I idolized him. But Arn and Bobby, those were my two because those two, I wanted to be both of them because they could work a broomstick or Ric Flair and have a 5-star match. And that's the guy that I wanted to be in professional wrestling, was to take the guy that has just started in professional wrestling or somebody that's been on top at WrestleMania and us tear the house down.
Was Bobby as nice as everybody says?
Absolutely. So, after I got to know him a little bit and I would see him on shows, he'd come up and hug me. And again, it's, like the first time I wrestled Dusty Rhodes or first time I stepped in the ring with Ricky Morton, when I met Bobby like that and got to know him on the outside, I'm calm and cool and collective, but on the inside, I'm the 10-year-old kid, about to pass out because these guys are my idols and heroes. And I'm actually in the ring with them or getting a hug from somebody that I wanted to be.
That's very good. So we're going to move on to something we call the 3 count now. It's going to be 3 quick questions and your answers. We're going to have to go back and forth, so I'll just call on you as we do it. So the first question, I started going bald when I was 21, so I can relate a little bit to looking and feeling 40s when you're young. So first, CW, is it a blessing or a curse, and why? I think he froze. Okay, so we're going to go to Brock. Blessing or a curse? Looking in your 40s when you're in your 20s.
It is a curse when you are at the bar trying to pick up a chick. It's a curse. It's a blessing when you're 18 and you're trying to buy beer legally. That's when it's a blessing. They look at that fake ID and say, no problem. You are definitely 28. As it's gone, I've become comfortable in the fact that I will at least look this good for the rest of my life. So I've comforted in that fact.
Very good. Next question on 3 count. Your favorite non-wrestling Anderson, and why? My vote would probably be Louis Anderson, I think.
Oh God, favorite non-wrestling Anderson. Dang, that's a good one. I'm not going to go the easy. I ain't going to say Pamela. That's too easy. Let's see. Damn, that's a good one. You know what? We'll just go Pamela because I'm blanking.
Let's go. The only ones that came to me when I was working on that were Louis and Lonnie. Lonnie Anderson, Burt Reynolds' old wife.
Okay. Yes.
So, yeah, I didn't even think of Pamela. And we'll see if we get CW back on in a moment. But last question on the 3 count. Who throws the best spine buster in wrestling who does not have the Anderson name?
Willie Hobbs, hands down. Powerhouse.
What about his makes it good?
He's a big hombre. He's a really solid dude. I love Willie. He's a great guy. And his viciousness and his just ferocity when he throws it. And he's got the technique down too, which not everybody. I mean, Triple H had a really good one. Everybody has a pretty decent straight up and down one. Like Batista had a really vicious straight up and down, or Ron Simmons straight up and down. But his power with the twist, I think, puts him over the top for me.
All right. Well, Brock and C.W. Anderson, I want to thank you for your time today. MLW, Thursday, August 29th, Summer of the Beasts at the Melrose Ballroom in Long Island City, Queens. I'm planning on being there. Thank you so much for joining me today, and all the best to you in this tag team and in your career moving ahead.
Phil, thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you.